Well, this morning we continue in our study of First Peter, and we are in a new chapter. We are in new chapter 4. We'll be looking at the first 6 verses of First Peter 4. And in this passage, Peter challenges us to move toward a life of sinlessness. Although we know that that's not possible in this world, that should be the goal as Christians. That should be the goal that we are striving for. So 1 Peter chapter 4, we'll look at the first 6 verses. He says, "Therefore, since Christ suffered in his body, arm yourselves also with the same attitude, because he who has suffered in his body is done with sin. As a result, he does not live the rest of his earthly life for evil human desires, but rather for the will of God. For you have spent enough time in the past doing what pagans choose to do, living in debauchery, lust, drunkenness, orgies, carousing, and detestable idolatry. Therefore, think it strange that you do not plunge they think it's strange that you do not plunge with them into the same flood of dissipation, and they heap abuse on you. But they will have to give account to him who is ready to judge the living and the dead. For this is the reason the gospel was preached, even to those who are now dead, so that they might be judged according to men in regard to the body, but live according to God in regard to the Spirit." Every true believer lives in this tremendous battle between the desire of the unredeemed flesh and the desires of a redeemed heart that is within us. It's like Paul talked about in Romans chapter 7. I don't do what I want to do, and I do what I don't want to do. And that is the battle that rages as long as we are in these physical bodies on this earth. That old nature and that new heart are going to battle a little bit in that deal. And the question is, as we look at this text, is how are we to deal with that warfare and that struggle? What are we striving to do? How are we to face the reality of that conflict and know the path to victory in that? And so as we dig into the passage, we need to look at a couple of perspectives. First, with regard to sin. And the first, we have to look forward we need to have a future focus, and that we're doing what Jesus said. We're watching and praying lest we enter into temptation. We need to be aware that temptation is going to come up. The passage Gary read talking about, hey, when you think you're doing okay, beware. Because it's when we think, oh yeah, I got this, that something will happen. But that passage also tells us no temptation comes to you that's not common to man, that you're not alone in the struggle, that this happens. And then it continues, and he completes that passage that he read by saying, God always makes a way. God always has a way for us to stand up against that temptation. And so first we need to look forward and be aware. Don't be foolish. We know that those things are going to pop up in life in those situations. Somebody is going to say something or do something or whatever, the circumstance is going to, and we want to react and say something or do something. And those are going to happen. Those temptations are going to happen. And so first we need to just keep that in mind. Be wise about that. Second, we must be there's a present dimension as well. There's a future, and then there's a present dimension. And not only must we be anticipating the future, but we must be dealing with what's presently here. We need to hate what is evil. We need to have it established in our mind about the sinfulness of this world. And Bible tells us that God hates sin, and that's what we should be, to hate sin, that we should have a present awareness of that stuff that's going on around us and push back against that. Cling to what is good. is what it is. Hate evil and cling to what is good. And then third, we need to have a look to the past. Be reminded of some of the things we've done in the past. This is not from a point of a guilt complex. You deal with that confessing the sin to God. It deals with the guilt. But also we know the old saying that if we don't learn from history, right? If we don't learn from history, what happens? We repeat it, right? Learn from those things that we've been through in the past. Look back on the stuff from the past and know that that was bad. And the sin, that is a reminder of what can happen in the future if we are not wise in what we do. Guard against that. So Peter's writing to the Christians we know that are experiencing great persecution and rejection. And he's talked about the difficulty of a godly person living in an ungodly situation, of a godly person being treated unjustly in this world. We saw at the end of chapter 3 that in the greatest suffering, there may be the greatest triumph. That when we go through those things, that the greatest triumph there. We saw that culminate with the example that Peter gave in verses 18 to 22 of the example of Christ, who in his greatest suffering had the greatest triumph. That over death and sin. And so we know that. And so as the hour of the greatest pain or severest persecution came upon Christ, he had a victory that the world didn't expect, has never known since. And the point is, no matter how difficult the hostility or how severe the persecution, understand that the most difficult time might be your most triumphant time in that. Christ is being murdered on a cross that he did not deserve. And while the enemies were celebrating for a little while, right? We knew what was coming then when Christ triumphed over death and over the demons and over Satan, all those things that happened. And then it tells us at the end of chapter 3 that then he was highly exalted by God the Father. With everything in subject to him. So Christian suffering can be triumphant. Before we jump into the main points, there are a few things need to establish in verse 1. It says, therefore, since Christ suffered in his body, arm yourselves also with the same attitude, because he who has suffered in the body is done with sin. Peter says Christ suffered in the body, but yet he has triumphed over sin. And we're to have that same attitude. We can have that same victory in a way that parallels what Christ did in that. When he says Christ suffered in the body, he's literally talking about him being killed, that this body died. But he was alive in the spirit in that. But it is a synonym for death here. Peter says, then arm yourselves also with the same attitude. The word translated attitude literally means purpose. The same purpose or the same principles that Christ had. So the same purpose or principles that you and I should be ready to die for righteousness' sake. In times of persecution and difficulty, what is the worst thing your enemy can do to you? Kill you. Absent from the body for the believer is what? Present with the Lord. What is the worst thing that can happen? And Paul went through that struggle talking about, I would like to be there, but I need to be here. But I know it's like when things come against me, what are they going to do? Kill me? Then I get rewarded in heaven. And so when we reach that point in persecution and things that we can accept the fact that if it costs me my life, it costs me my life here. But it gets me quicker to eternity there. And that we know it's going to be tough. Jesus said, take up your cross and follow me daily. Take up your cross and follow me daily. He said, in this world you're going to have tribulation. But take heart because I have overcome the world. It's like those difficult things are going to happen. the question is, what is your attitude toward the difficult things? Peter says, arm yourself, in the same idea that Christ had when he died. Scripture said that Christ endured those things because of the joy that was set before him. You say, what? He knows all this stuff that's getting ready to happen to him. Christ does as he enters into Jerusalem in the last week that he's on this earth in that. And it says he's able to do that because of the joy that was set before him. What joy is that? It's the resurrection. It's going to have some really bad stuff happen between now and then. But he knows what then is. When that resurrection, that triumph. So the triumph at the end of verse 1, because he who has suffered in the body is done with sin. If you are a Christian and you die for the cause of Christ, persecuted to the point of death, you will not sin ever again. Because you will be in heaven and you will be delivered from those struggles and temptations of earth. Well, that is the mindset. That is the mindset. In this world, we don't have very many people that lose their life because of their cause for Christ. But it happens around the world every day. The question is that our mindset? Doesn't mean that we're going to go out and face necessarily that threat of death because of our faith tomorrow. But it might make it a whole lot easier to deal with other things that are going on when we're persecuted in other ways. Said, what's the worst thing that can happen? It can kill me, and I'm with the Lord. All right? That can go on. That's the triumph. The worst the persecutors can do is kill you. It talks about killing the flesh, being judged in the flesh. That means in this life, in this body. That's the worst thing that can happen. But we're delivered. And so the kind of attitude produces is an attitude. It's given to us in verse 2. As a result, they do not live the rest of their earthly life for evil human desires, but rather for the will of God. If you have that mindset about sin and hating sin and not worrying about the persecution that you may get. And for us, persecution can be you don't get invited to go to eat lunch with these people because they know that there's going to be a rub. Hey, we're inviting a lot of guys from work to go to the bar after work, and we're not inviting you. Good. I'm thrilled with that. Okay? The deal, when we reach that point with sin, that it doesn't bother us if we don't get a promotion, we don't get invited to the party, we don't get the invitation to something, we don't do whatever it is, it's not going to bother me. It doesn't bother me. Why? Because I don't care about the things of this world like that. All right? When we reach that point, it says that instead of living for evil human desires, I don't care if I don't get enough likes on Facebook, or if I'm not popular, or if I don't have whatever it is. I'm not worried about the things of this world. I don't have the fancy car and the big house, or the whatever those things are. When none of those temptations affect us, it says, then at the end of verse 2, then you live for the will of God. When that becomes the driving force in how we live, we don't let these other things bother us. Peter's saying, once you arm yourself with the reality of that goal, it diffuses temptation. Oh, really, Satan? No. I am not going to waste 10 minutes in this temptation. I'm moving on because I'm living for an eternity. And it changes our perspective on things. Whether it's to, I got to jump in the middle of the juicy gossip that I just heard, and you won't believe this, and I got to tell it. I want to be in that story because I want to be in with the group. No, I don't care. I'm going on without that. We can get rid of that sin that so easily entangles, is what Paul calls it. As we move forward, Peter begins to explore that concept. Then he says, so remember what sin has done. Remember, that much from the past, that much from your history, you need to remember. Not the guilt, not the, oh, I wish I would have, whatever. But what did it do to you? What did that sin cause? What struggles were there? So first, let's remember what it did to Christ. What did sin do to Jesus? He killed him. He didn't have any sin. He didn't have any sin. But sin brought deceit, lies, the hatred of men, all the sinful things of this world came against God's Son that was sent to save us. That perfect one, without sin. There's no greater illustration of that should make us hate sin than to see what it's done, what it did to Christ in that, and what he had to suffer because of sin. So that's the first thing that we see. Remember what it did to Christ. And the second thing, remember what sin has done to Christians. Even to Christians. How many Christians have not pursued in life the best things that God has laid out for them because of sin? They've gotten tripped up, they've fallen on their face with something and whatever, and it's cost them something because of sin. Even those that love the Lord, but allow themselves to get caught up in temptation. Sin hurts them, and it kills them too. If there was no sin in this world, we would not have to die. Right? Go back to the garden. If there was no sin in this world, we wouldn't have to go through this aging process of aches and the pains and the health issues we've talked about and all the other stuff that goes on. Because there would have been no need for deliverance of sin. Remember, go back to the fall and everything that affected the world. Paul says in Romans 1 that the whole creation groans because of sin. From the groan you make when you get up out of the chair, and I make when we get up out of the chair, to the heartache. It all is there. Remember what sin did to Christ. It killed him. Remember what it does to Christians. It's dropped them short of what they should have, what God had laid out for them, and it also causes them to die. Third, remember not only what it did to Christ and the Christians, but what has sin done to God? Do you think about that? What do you mean? God doesn't sin, so what? No. But it's broken his heart to see those that he loves do the mistakes. You ever seen your kids make mistakes, or your grandkids make mistakes along the way, make a bad choice, or do something you wish they wouldn't have done? What does it do to your insides? Breaks your heart, doesn't it? Breaks your heart. And you know they're settling for less than the best that God had for them. That's what sin does to God. He looks down and he goes, I created this to be better. And you all just continually trip over yourselves in that. What it does, it thwarts God's will. His plan moves forward, but in individual lives, things don't happen. The Bible is full of verses about obedience and following God's will and the blessings and the stuff that come from that. And that's how Peter ends verse 2 in there, that if we get our mind settled about sin and move on, then we're following the will of God. We can do the will of God, but if we allow sin to affect us, it's going to mess things up. Jesus said in Matthew 7, everyone who hears these words of mine and acts upon them is like the wise man who built his house upon the rock. And the rain descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew and burst against that house, and yet it did not fall, for it had been founded upon the rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not act upon them will be like the foolish man who built his house upon the sand. And the rains came, and the floods came, and the winds blew and burst against the house, and the house fell with a great fall. acting upon the will of God and building that strong foundation, that we stand against those things, or when we are not obedient to that, the things can happen. Paul reminds us in Romans 12, don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect. Ephesians 6:6, we are to be servants of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart. Those are the good things. That's what it should be. And that should bring joy, and it does, to God when He sees us doing what He's called us to do. But it breaks His heart when He watches us stumble through and fall in sin in that. The fourth thing, remember what sin has done to humanity in general. Every one of us knows a family, a life, a country, things in this world that have been destroyed by sin. We all know somebody that's been affected by an addiction, drugs or alcohol or something that's happened that a family has crumbled and lost, and the kids have been hurt, and all the stuff that's happened. We all know people that have done in this humanity. We've seen the horrible, disgusting things on the news or wherever that somebody has done to other people. All the things that sin has done to humanity. And we should therefore be able to have a hate towards sin and be reminded when we're tempted that that is part of that culture. And I don't want anything to do with it. And stand against that sin. He goes on and he gives this description in verses 3-5 of some of that things. A lot of these guys, and a lot of folks, a lot of Christians have been through done some really bad things in our life. And no different when Peter says, for you've spent enough time in the past doing what the pagans choose to do. All right? Time for a change. And he gives this description of them living in debauchery, lust, drunkenness, orgies, carousing, detestable idolatry. This is, and they're surprised. You ever been through that? And they're surprised you won't join in with them. Hey, we're going to know. He says they're surprised that you don't join them in their recklessness and wild living. And so they heap abuse on you. Oh, you're the goody two-shoes. That was the old one as kids, right? I don't know. Along the way. Oh, the party pooper. Oh, you don't want to go have fun. Doesn't matter to me. You go ahead. I'm okay. I'm not going to watch that movie, or I'm not going to go to that place, or I'm not going to hang around for this joke, or whatever the case is. But I'm not going to be part of it. All right? I'm not going to be part of that conversation and that. That's the deal. He says they're surprised, and so they throw abuse on you. They call you names, and they spread rumors or lies about you. So what? It doesn't matter if we have died to sin. Because verse 5 says, but they will have to give an account to him who is ready to judge the living and the dead. Pretty graphic reminder. He says about humanity and what humanity is at. He says, you spent enough of your life in that. You should not be part of that anymore. It's time to move on to other things. And Peter gives one last thing to remember that should help us to strive to live a sinless life, to stand against sin and temptation. Remember what God promised you that overcomes sin. Verse 6, for this is the reason the gospel was preached, even to those who are now dead, so that they might be judged according to men in regard to the body, but live according to God in regard to the Spirit. Stand against this. This is the reason for the gospel. It's the sin of man that caused the whole need for Christ to come. That's the gospel message. We were dead in our trespasses and sin, and Christ came to make a way that we could be reconciled with God and live in eternity with Him. He says, so listen. Even to those saints, even those who've died, even those who've received Christ and have died from this world, they're now living a sinless life in eternity in heaven. He says, let the body be judged by men, by the standards of this world. Don't fear, remember the last week? Don't fear the one who can kill the body. Fear the one that can kill the body and soul. This body doesn't go anywhere. It stays on here. It turns to dust. But those that know Christ live according to God in regard to the Spirit. To eternity in heaven. So Peter takes us back where we started. All that death can do to you is bring you into the presence of the everlasting God. All that death in this life can do to you is bring you into the presence of the everlasting God. Now at that point there's judgment. No one escapes that. I don't know about you, but I have somebody that's going to step forward at that time and say, I took his penalty. Enter into heaven. Christ is the attorney. Stands on our behalf. He's the one that says no penalty here. Paid in full. Here's the penalty. Here's the sentence. And it's been paid in full. All death can do is bring us into the presence of God. Christ died in the body, but he wasn't dead in the spirit. And he was resurrected to that new perfected body with no more aches and pains. No more of those things to happen. That's the promise. They may kill your body, but your spirit will be alive. And we enter into that promise of eternal life. So shunning sin, saying no to sin, saying no to temptation, doing those kind of things is possible. The verse Gary read, God always makes a way out of that temptation. We just often don't choose to follow that way. We're more worried about what other people will say, or more worried about what's convenient or easy for us, instead of taking the way that God has out. But it is possible, and it is noble, it's righteous, and it is commanded by Scripture. That is the choices and the way we are to live. Remember what Christ did to sin. Remember what Christ does to Christians. Remember what sin does to God. Remember what sin does to humanity. Remember what God has promised you in the future if you place your hands in Christ. There are no excuses that hold water. Oh, I've always been that way. That's just how I am. It's blah, blah, blah. Well, if they did this or they did that. No excuses. No excuses. No temptation has overtaken you except what is common to man. And God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, he will also provide a way out so that you can endure it. Fear not that those that can destroy the body, but fear the one who destroys both body and soul. All Christians battle. All Christians have that battle. Even those guys that you say, man, that guy, he's got it so together. It's so smooth. You see those people, I go, I don't know how their feathers are never ruffled. They're just right. They struggle with temptation. They struggle with that in their heart. Maybe they've become mature enough in their faith that they do a lot better about taking the way out of that temptation than maybe you or I do. That's it. But it's a maturing thing that we grow toward in that when we flip over sin and temptation and all those things, we look at the other side of what God promises us and the benefits and the blessings that come with that. It's not even close. And so that's the challenge. To stand against sin, to grow in our disdain for the sin of the world, against the temptation, become what God has called us to be. Father, what a tough passage, but what a